Hi, I'm Shoma Chaudhury. Thank you for watching Inquiry. China and COVID have been commanding attention in India. But beneath that, the usual wheels of our politics and society have continued to turn. Now, as digital rallies are heating up for upcoming elections and the Ayodhya temple is being built, it seems an important time to revisit the idea of Ram in the subcontinent, the richness, plurality, and expansiveness of the tradition, and the ways in which it is deployed by Hindutva. The argument over Ram has impacted and redefined modern politics in India. There's also heated debate over Islam and the impact of Muslim rule in India and the way Hinduism was wronged by conquests. Is there a way of opening up this conversation which is not tinged with anger, hate, revenge, and retaliation? Is there a way that there can be a renaissance which does not become a fresh cycle of oppression upon contemporary citizens? To explore those issues, I'm delighted to have with me today Pavan Varma. Pavan is a diplomat, a polymath, a parliamentarian, but most importantly, he's a writer of innumerable books on the middle class in India, as well as on mythological characters, Adi Shankaracharya, Krishna, and now Ram. Thank you very much for joining me, Pavan.
It is mine always.
To start with, Pavan, your book is dedicated to your parents who were devotees of Maryada Purushottam Ram. So, can you talk about the idea of Ram that you grew up with throughout your childhood and how has that changed in your adult life?
First of all, Shoma, I don't like the word mythical and I don't like the word mythology. Every great religion, especially if it's emanating from a great civilization, and there is no more complex, refined, and ancient civilization than the Hindu civilization. When I say Hindu, I include Buddhism and Jainism and other heterodoxies that Hinduism enabled and nurtured, which was in India not for 500 years, but for 4,000 years, from 3000 BCE till at least 10,000 BC, unchallenged. And it created a remarkable civilization. You know, Egypt went, Mesopotamia went, Greece went. This civilization, even after the 10th century CE, has continued and even it's alive. So we are talking about divinities of this civilization. Now, when you say mythical characters, remember a great deal of cumulative faith of millions of people are attached to these gods for whom they are real.
Absolutely.
And therefore, I'm sorry, it's not at all your intention, but there is a Western approach to Hinduism personified by people like Wendy Doniger, who want to reduce a very, very nuanced and sophisticated religion to mythology, and to use trawl through some of the obiter dicta of Hinduism, the Puranas texts, or some regional local text, or some text at variance with the dominant theme, to somehow show that Hinduism is not a religion but a collation of totally discordant diversities. That is not the case, first and foremost. For me, unlike my parents, for whom Ram was a matter of faith which they lived with, I remember my father, who was in the ICS, so he was not one of those very, very orthodox background people. He would begin the day by singing in our family puja room, Jai Ram Rama Ramanang Shamanang Bhavatab Bayakul Pahi Janam Avadesha Suresha Ramesha Vibho Sharanangat Mangat Pahi Prabhu. That was his prayer. My mother, who spoke the
Which in a line means what for those who don't?
Surrender to Ram. Jai Ram Rama Ramanang Shamanang Bhavatapa Bayakul Pahi Janam. Who will cure you of the tribulations of your incarnate life. And for my mother, who spoke the Queen's English otherwise, she knew the Ramayan by heart. So I grew up with that, but with our education, and I don't mean to decry it in any way. I'm a beneficiary of it. St. Columbus, St. Xavier, St. Stephens, and so on and so forth. There is a tendency of a certain class to become adrift from their own cultural roots. And we need to once again reconnect with it, not blindly, not through xenophobic belief, not through chauvinism, but to at least know what that culture talks about, because it's in our interest.
On that, I completely agree with you, Pavan. There's definitely a need to revive interest and engagement with one's own culture. So much of the resentment around us now arises out of this gap between the English-speaking elite and our own spiritual, cultural, emotional heritage. But when you criticize people like Wendy Doniger or anyone who's points to different aspects of the Ramayana or different versions of the Ramayana, aren't we sort of denying the richness and plurality of our own tradition? I mean, the 300 Ramayans does exist. The Jain Ramayan does exist. The Kamban Ramayan, the Valmiki Ramayan, Tulsidas's Ramayan. The grandeur is that it traveled to so many cultures, in Southeast Asia, in South India too. The versions differ. For instance, in some versions, Sita is seen as the daughter of Ravan and Mandodari. There are others where she's found in a basket floating down a river. So why would we want to reduce all these rich and varied stories into one dominant idea of the Ramayana? And wouldn't that be denying other people their versions of the faith?
Again, Shoma, your question requires analysis. I find it richly ironical that the gaze of many people who see, for instance, 300 Ramayans, which is really a tribute to the fact that Hinduism allows for many variants of that one story, or if you want to put it differently, one truth. Ekam satya vipraha bahuda vatanti. There is one truth. Wise people call it by different names. Liberals will use this argument of the diversity that Hinduism confidently and self-assuredly nurtures as a reason to say that there is no such thing as Hinduism at all. I mean, as you are not saying that, but I know many people who do. So A.K. Ramanujan will talk of the great tradition and little traditions. Amartya Sen will deny, for instance, that there is anything called Hinduism. He will go to the extent of saying Nalanda was a Buddhist university and Buddhism has nothing to do with Hinduism, which is, in my view, is factually inaccurate and definitely displays a bias. So if you read Yun Sang's account of Nalanda, it says that so much of Hinduism overlapped with Buddhism and both were studied in the Harvard of Asia of that time. So if there are many Ramayans, to come back to your question, it shows that unlike Abrahamic faiths, there is not only one text which you have to prescriptively follow. And the greatness of Hinduism is that it allows that. So Valmiki writes the Ramayana in 500 years before the Common Era or whatever date you want to put to it. And then you have other Ramayans which adapt that particular story of the epic to regional circumstances, local variations, local imagination. So you have Tulsidas' Ramcharitmanas, which of course came in the 16th century. You have Kamban's Ramayan, and a very important Ramayana of the 15th century, the Adhyatma Ramayana. So I am trying to say that there are many Ramayans, but there is one Ramayan story, which within it encapsulates one central theme of Hinduism, which is A, the notion of Maryada Purushottam, and B, a central tenet of Hinduism, which is the dialectic between Nirgun and Sagun divinity. And then you can have as many stories, because beyond the Ramayana there are the Puranas. And they allow the imagination to go in any direction they want. Because, again, to reiterate that point, Hinduism does not believe in heresy. We may have been cruel and we have discriminated. We as Hindus have never burnt anyone on the stake.
But that is what one takes pride in, Pavan, this essential plurality in the heart of Hinduism. I don't know which particular argument you're referring to by Amartya Sen, where he says Hinduism doesn't exist. I'm not sure anybody makes that assertion. It was probably something that was articulated against the idea of Hindutva, which is trying to recast Hinduism. Because in fact, now we are constantly trying to remind ourselves that there is no heresy within Hinduism, that all kinds of traditions coexist. And, in fact, why are we even saying that that is what is allowed? Because who is going to allow that? That is just what Hinduism is, or that's what my understanding would be.
Shoma, if you are against the political construct of Hindutva, then you must use Hinduism and its many other traditions to have a confrontation at the level of a civilized interaction with those who espouse that theory. Your reaction cannot be to oppose political Hindutva by devaluing Hinduism.
Totally agree with you on that, in total agreement, except that describing its multifacetedness doesn't equal devaluing it. But we'll come to all those arguments about between liberals and Hindutva wadis a little later. First, I wanted to explore the richness and meaning of the tradition. So you grew up with the idea of Maryada Purushottam Ram, and now you've translated verses of Tulsidas's Ramayan. Tell me as an adult, what surprised you? What did you love about it, and what did you find problematic?
What I was fascinated by when I began to read the Ramcharitmanas was that it was a remarkable literary work. I mean, Shoma, you have to understand the sheer genius of a poet. Shri Ramachandra Kripalu Bhajaman Harana Bhava Bhay Darunam. I mean, the use of language. Nava Kanjalo Chana Kanja Mukhakara Kanja Pad Kanjarunam. How does one write it? 12,000 lines of great literature. Then, of course, it tells a story which is captivating in its own way. But thirdly, the discovery for me was how Tulsidas in the 16th century, espousing personally the shagun, the attributeful concept of divinity, and being a great votary of the Bhakti school, of Prapatti, of surrender, tries to harmonize this with the Nirguna, attributeless concept of divinity. The great dialogue between Adi Shankaracharya and Ramanuja. Vishisht Advait and Advait. So this is, for instance, Tulsidas now. He's aware of philosophy. Now don't think he's a poet sitting in Ayodhya writing about a story. He's deeply immersed in Hindu philosophy. So he'll cite Aguna Sagun Doi Brahma Sarupa. Akatha Akatha Anadi Anupa. Both Nirgun and Sagun are two manifestations of that same Brahma. Tulsidas is the only one who wrote on Ram. There has been huge works on Krishna and Radha. But really Tulsidas brought Ram to that pedestal. So he says it is bhakti. Aguna arupa alakh ajajoi. That which is nirgun, without form. Arup, alakh, ajajoi, unborn. Listen to the next line. Bhagati prema bas saguna hojoi. In other words, because of the love of the devotee, the nirgun becomes the sagun. So it's a great work at the level of philosophy. Then finally, to answer your question, the great nuggets of wisdom, of sheer wisdom that have the sap of the soil. For instance, Tulsidas will say, Nahi koi as janam ma jag mahi, prabhuta pai jahi mad nahi. No one yet has been born on this earth who once he acquires power is free of pride. Now it's part of the wisdoms that have been put or for the political parties to understand. Preeti Birod Saman Sam Kariya. Love or enmity. Do it with people of your own standing. Preeti Birod Samana Sam Kariya. नीति असी आही, जो मृगपति बध मेंढ की, भलो तब क्या कही. If you have to have the equality, just as wisdoms of the time, love and enmity, if you like the word, priti, birod, or opposition. Do it at the level of yourself. Both
But
love and opposition.
so
Because
that
if the king of the jungle were to kill a frog, then tell me what has he achieved?
that's an interesting treatise on power, Pavan. But insofar as equality goes, whether in love or social relations, there's a huge emphasis on Brahmanism right through Tulsidas. He's constantly speaking about placing yourself at the feet of Brahmins, of being devoted to Brahmins. And in fact, Shabri, who's low caste, describes herself in really debased terms. So again, like that's the fascinating, complex aspect of Hinduism, that there's a kind of moral relativism which is at the heart of it. There's the transactional idea of dharma itself, because in the Ramayan, Bali is unfairly killed by Ram, and even when Ravan is killed, it's actually Vibhishan who gives the secret away to how to vanquish him. But let's deal with the idea of caste first. In your notes and your explanations, you said that this emphasis on Brahmanism could be read as, as respect for learned men, for learning. But the fact of the matter is that no one would have had access to learning in that era except Brahmins, because they were the custodians of learning.
I will just say to you on empirical research that while I fully concur with the criticism that the caste system is a bane of Hindu civilization, and that even a man who's demonized, like rightly so by some people, like Savarkar, people don't know that he put up a 7-point plan for the reform of Hinduism. And number one was the removal of caste and its inequities and exploitation. So we need to deal with those things. I am not for a moment denying. Only thing is, in Tulsidas' Ramcharitmanas, you have other instances. Like, for instance, his interaction with Shabri. Now, somebody may consider it a Raja condescendingly going to a woman, but Tulsidas also lays down a context for it. That there are many people asking him to visit their ashrams or their dwellings at that time, far more influential and powerful. But he says to Lakshman, I must go to this lady who comes from the lowest rung of the social order. And he spends time there. And when Lakshman will not eat the bear that she gives, which has been tasted by, because of caste differential, Ram chastises him not to do it. He says it's the love of the lady. So, I mean, there are many aspects to it, but I don't condone Tulsidas's, if it's interpreted in that way, valorization of the Brahmins. Well, the one other aspect, Shoma, which I think would be interesting for your viewers. You see, Hinduism, as I understand it, my last book was on Adi Shankaracharya and so on, has a remarkable, it's almost impossible for a Western mind to grasp it. A remarkably layered notion of divinity itself. So for a Maryada Purushottam, there has to be a Leela Purushottam. For every Ram, there has to be a Krishna. If Ram stands as the epitome of rectitude, of what is right irrespective, and by the way, he plays it out. I mean, here is Kaikeyi telling him to go into wilderness for 14 years when he's the rightful claimant to the throne. Now you would expect in a modern epic for Ram to rail against this unjust decision. Now you know what he says to Kaikeyi? Because he's Maryada Purushottam. Sun janani soi sut bada bhagi, jo pitumat bachan anuragi. Listen, mother, that child is doubly blessed who, with loving care, listens to his parents. Now, this is Maryada Purushottam. You can criticize it. But this is what he will do because there is a filial duty. Your command, I will obey, even if it's unfair or unjust from my point of view. That's Krishna is not that. Krishna is the God who steals butter, lies to his mother, is precautious with the gopis as an adolescent, openly frolics with them in the groves of Vrindavan. He's Radha, who's got a divine status, and we people say Radhe Krishna, is by many accounts not his wife but his companion or mistress, and theirs is a divine love. Only Hinduism can accept this Maryada Purushottam and Leela Purushottam. Similarly, as far as Devi is concerned, for every Sita there has to be a Radha. For every Uma there has to be Kali. This is the bandwidth that Hinduism, in its conceptual evolution of the sophistication of the notion of divinity, will allow, which is incomprehensible, especially to Abrahamic faiths.
That's fascinating because Ram and Krishna are also both avatars of Vishnu, and yet they have such different impulses. But just to understand further, I mean, in the Mahabharata, the philosophical core is in the Gita, which is the dialogue between Arjun and Krishna. In the Ramayana, are there any verses like that which completely embody the philosophical core of the Ramayana?
Actually, those verses in the Ramayana are like a thread going through the Ramcharitmanas. They will come up in the beginning about the notion of the absolute. They will come up in a conversation between Lakshman and Sri Ram when he asks him to explain Maya. For instance, Maya. Now look at the brilliance of Tulsidas. He says, May or more, tor, te Maya. The notion of I and mine and yours is Maya. It's that illusion created by May or more, tor, te Maya. Now this is just one line. It's brilliant in its brevity. It sums up the whole notion of what Maya does to people.
So there's this, expansive, vivid, poetic, philosophical Ramayana that you're describing. So help us clarify, Pavan, that what is the difference between the Ram of Tulsidas and Valmiki and the weaponized Ram of Hindutva that one encounters in India's public life now?
About Ram, let me say that he was not a passive god. He was Maryada Purushottam, but not a passive god. He fought against injustice. He went to fight against Ravan with an army he put together and defeated him. Is he a irrationally angry god? Is he a unnecessarily vengeful god? Is he a god who will take the law into his own hands? Or even is he a god who will fight what is wrong but with no respect for his opponent? I don't believe so. This is if I read through my traditions, for instance, Tulsidas through Ram tells Bharat, and these lines are important. He says to Bharat, Par hit saris dharam nahi bhai, par peeda sam nahi athmai. Par hit, the welfare of others. There is no greater virtue than this. And par peeda, injury to others, there is no greater sin than this. Now this is Maryada Purushottam Ram. When he's born, Tulsidas in an amazingly beautiful stanza says, the first line he says, Bhai Pragat Kripala, now is born the merciful, Deen Dayala, protector of the weak. And later on he says, Karuna Sukh Sagar, the ocean of compassion. Now for this Ram, if there is injustice, he would fight for it, against it. But this is not a Ram who would, on the basis of suspicion, lynch to death people and justify it by the slogan Jai Shri Ram. This is not the Ram. So my advice to those who are doing this is first to read Tulsidas' Ramcharitmanas, to read Valmiki, to read the Upanishads, to read something about Hindu religion and say that yes, there could have been, and by the way, Hinduism has been wronged. Please don't be under any illusions. It's been wronged by two conquests where it stopped the natural evolution of a civilization based on that religion, and it has been betrayed by its own after 1947 because their tendency was to believe that if you use the word Hindu or went back to ancient India, you were tantamount to being communal. And therefore, you have neglected or remained indifferent to one of the greatest civilizations the world has seen. If you want to rectify this, get into the skin of your religion, its spirituality, its metaphysics. Ram would have loved it. He would not have approved irrational violence.
Pavan, we definitely need to address this question of history in Islam that you raised and of Hinduism being wronged by two conquests. But before that, I want to finish exploring the criticism of liberals that you have. You've spoken of Wendy Doniger, and there are others. But I'll put that question to you again, that don't you think the strength of Hinduism is that it's a living tradition that's constantly evolving, and that is so modern in that way? Part of the problem of colonialism was that modernity had got equated with being Western, whereas our own traditions have that capacity for being modern. But that comes out of us being allowed to constantly revisit it, come at it from different angles. We spoke about Sita and how different Ramayans have different origin versions of her story. And now there's so many women writers who are coming to the epics from a women's perspective, questioning the stories of Sita and Kaikeyi and reevaluating Sita and Draupadi in different light. So where would you place all of that in the tradition? Don't you think that's a valid exercise? I mean, Tulsidas himself was located in time. He's writing in the 16th century. And similarly, the beauty is that generation upon generation can dialogue with the epics, and they keep evolving and adapting with the time.
Hinduism gives you the entire freedom to interrogate divinity. In Jagannath Puri, there are devotees who go to pray to Lord Krishna in that form, who abuse him, literally abuse him. Four-letter words. They say, you so and so, you promised this to me. It didn't happen. Now give me a reason. That's the intimacy between God and his devotee. Hinduism allows for it. You can interrogate divinity. Ask the questions about the female characters in Hindu religious imagination and the pantheon of Hinduism. It's perfectly valid. There is nothing wrong in it. But don't, for instance, say, take out a text from somewhere. Like, I'm sorry to repeat the name, Wendy Doniger does in The Hindus, an alternative narrative or history or whatever, where she says that tries to provide evidence that Lakshman and Sita were in a relationship. Because A, it's against what the text says. B, it's titillation. You would dare not do it with Christianity or with Islam. You take liberties with Hinduism. And in the preface to your book, you write, I was appalled at some of the reaction because I thought the Hindus won't read this book at all. 600 pages of a book on Hinduism. Look at the reverse or resurrected Orientalism that she believes that as an American scholar, that Hindus won't read the book. It's quite amazing. So don't do it, because Valmiki says, as they are trying to find Sita, he finds pieces of her cloak and jewelry and he asks Lakshman, isn't this hers? And Lakshman says to his brother Ram, that I have never looked above her ankles. So all I can recognize is her anklets. Now, you may say, Okay, that's prudish. You can see it. But that is the notion of faith in which people hold the relationship between Lakshman and Sita. And here you come, taking off a text out of context. And in a talk in the UK, presided over by William Dalrymple, you make this assertion and have an egg thrown by a Hindu on you. Rightly so.
Well, Pavan, I mean, maybe here I have a different pride in Hinduism that I feel, when we keep saying, oh, you can't dare do this to Islam, you can't dare do this to Christianity, the strength of Hinduism was that it was not so fragile. It could withstand any amount of radical, subversive readings of it.
Yes,
And still
radical,
live on as a
subversive, but
tradition.
not,
Why are we
but
becoming so
not
fragile?
ill-informed. Sorry, Shoma. Not ill-informed, not mischievous,
The absence of
not
information.
malafide. Please, let's be clear. I mean, if I'm defending Adi Shankaracharya's philosophy, and somebody said that he can speak only of monism, the one Brahm, because you can't count till two. Now, unless you see it as caricature, if it's serious criticism, I will be offended by it because you don't know the grandeur of thought that has gone behind it. So therefore, please don't see sometimes the reactions of Hindus to basically criticism of certain things in Hinduism which should be criticized, which they legitimately believe is done not on the basis of empathetic and constructive criticism or natural interrogation, but with a purpose, which is malafide from my point of
The
view.
only thing worrying me in our conversation is not that there shouldn't be a response or a counter criticism, but that when we base it on, it's so subjective. What is their intention? What are they doing? What I'm trying to reclaim from my love of Hinduism is that this has been a tradition that has absorbed so much and it has still continued to have a coherent spirit and essence that has gone from generation to
I can't
generation.
agree with you. So much that has happened to Hindus has been deleterious to it. What happened during Islamic rule, and we have become one country, and there was a syncretism that developed later, but it was a huge setback, the destruction of the artifacts of Hindu culture. And what happened under the British was even worse because it mentally
Yeah, that was
colonized
salt on the side.
Hindus themselves. So how can you say, I mean, of course Hinduism will survive, and I hope will flourish, and I hope will revive itself with true pride, without being necessarily dogmatic, didactic, xenophobic. There is no need for it. But Hinduism or Hindus reserve the right to question some of the critiques, and if they question, they don't become bigoted Hindutva wadis.
But Pavan, like I've said, that I'm an advocate of the counter criticism and of the pushback on liberals and what they might need to reevaluate. But the question I'd put to you is that would you want that book banned or would you want to continue to engage with it? And if you think it's ludicrous, then show it up for its ludicrousness.
Frankly, I wouldn't ban a book because we don't believe in blasphemy. But we can be hurt. That's my right.
That's fair enough. It's the response in.
We can be hurt as a Hindu, as a believing Hindu, but we are enormously and sometimes unpardonably forgiving. We can forgive.
It's our strength, Pavan.
It's a great strength, but we are not a football to be kicked about without any response. When we respond, sometimes in a bit of anger, it's immediately interpreted as bigoted Hinduism raising its head. That is not a conflation which is right. Please try to understand. If for 300 years we have not responded, and I've been taught things about our culture and Hindu's religion which are not true, that's a sign of our tolerance. And if we respond, It's a sign of our intolerance.
No. I think the danger, Pavan, is that not that at all. If you've been taught things which were or like you said, the whole colonial project was to make you ashamed of your own heritage, to see it as a lower intellect. Those are of course what you need Renaissance for. But if it makes you afraid, which it is doing, to engage, to bring, to say now revive, to read the women characters through new eyes, to see it critically, to reposition, Draupadi or Sita as strong. Now, for instance, there are women who've written of them as the first Me Too warrior, or Sita as the first single parenting, or to retrieve the Ahalya story or Mandodari. That's part of a living tradition. But when you start to feel so hurt and scared, even those things are seen
It's a
as...
long time. It will be a long time before Hindus become quote unquote so hurt and scared. We take a lot. I said we collectively as Hindus, because that's our tradition. And by the way, the greater the interrogation, the better. We have allowed it. That is not the issue here, Shoma. We should, Draupadi, for instance, even before she's dragged out by her hair from her room to that assembly of men at the time of the play of dice, she asks the question, who did he lose first? Me or himself? It's a question of jurisprudence. So, we have, the question that Gargi asked, the questions that Maitreya asked, they are on one side. On the other hand, we have graphic instances of gender inequality also. You have to read the Manusmriti. In other words, Hinduism is welcome to interrogation. There should be a balanced appraisal as far, from my point of view, of that, rather than a mala-fide one. But even if it is mala-fide,
it should be in the level of dialogue.
We can take it on board, and above all, do it with slight smile.
Sorry,
Because we've survived this long.
Pavan, your last statement got staggered. You said,
do it, we can take this critique with a smile. Because we've survived this long, we'll continue to survive.
Not just survive, thrive,
Right. There's no issue, but let it be a sabhya samvad, a civilized discourse. The other side should be also open to critique.
Yeah, but
very often they dismiss. No, why I'm saying this binary. Very often a riposte or a rejoinder now, even if it comes from a person like me, who is not, I believe, an illiterate bigot, but a scholar, I hope, on Hinduism, will be seen as a manifestation, an unexpected manifestation, and even arrogant manifestation of a new bigotry in Hinduism. Why is that the case? If I ask a question to Professor Wendy Doniger about her methodology, or if I ask a question with great respect to Dr. Amartya Sen about some of his conclusions, why should it be a sign of bigotry? Because does anyone have a monopoly on liberalism? Or is liberalism necessarily tantamount to a devaluation of Hinduism?
No, absolutely not. I think that for me, and I've been saying that there is a lot of interest, this gap of knowledge, of engagement, of renaissance. I keep using the word renaissance because it's first to revive knowledge, engagement, empathy, pleasure in your own culture and heritage, rather than seek to, seek revenge, because I don't think cultures take revenge on each other. And that's why I think the only bits in your argument which are making me personally uncomfortable would be where one says, well, can you take that kind of criticism? And so we'll shut ourselves down. I would like to, if, for instance, if Islam and Christianity, assuming for a moment, cannot take interrogation. I would hate for Hinduism not to be able to take interrogation in
I
turn.
keep repeating to you, Shoma, that Hinduism is willing to take that criticism.
Whether they do or
Are
not.
those who are critics willing, on occasion, for an informed and civilized rejoinder? Or is their reflex defense mechanism going to be, yeah, they don't want criticism, these are the new bigoted Hindus? This is a wrong conflation. They have been used to them writing the books and Hindus reading them. I think it's time to now question. And the whole movement began with Edward Said's Orientalism.
Right. So the other unexplored strand which you opened up was, of course, this idea of historic hurt. And that lies at the heart of so much of our contemporary conflicts and fault lines. So there, Pavan, I wanted to understand that how do you see, it's undeniable that there was devastation, there was breaking of temples during the years of Muslim rule. But my thinking on that is that that was also medieval logic. That was the logic of the time. Hindu kings also attacked Hindu kingdoms. There were, it was not a monolithic thing. There were, for instance, Aurangzeb's son.
This is the problem with narration of history.
No,
because Hindu kings attacked Hindu kings. They didn't break places of worship. They didn't destroy repositories of centuries of wisdom. Please, I'm not trying to be now excavating the past to create any kind of communal acrimony, but one way of overcoming the past is to accept it. In South Africa, you had a Truth and Reconciliation Commission. It's statements like the ones you are making which create the problem.
No, so
Hindu kings who patronized Buddhist monasteries. There were people like Ashok who patronized and gave money to Hindu institutions. There were tensions between Shaiv and Vaishnavas, but it didn't lead to destruction or the assertion that at any cost we will finish you off.
No, so
so that example is erroneous.
No. The question, you didn't let me finish my question, was that there is been, of course, devastation and violence during the Mughal rule and obliteration of cultures or of temples, but also some of it
Mughal rule.
Muslim rule. I'm saying Muslim rule. But there was also coincided at that time Hindu kings that coincided. There were Hindu kings in the realm of Muslim rulers, as their key generals, or say Aurangzeb's son. Finish hearing me, Pavan. Aurangzeb's son Akbar fought along with the Marathas. There was Malik Ambar who fought against the Mughals. So it was like a very dynamic medieval age. I don't deny that destruction happened. I am asking, in a modern era, truth and reconciliation is a different matter. That's an acceptance of something that's happened in the past. But do you believe that modern Muslims had any control over what the kings of the past did? Should they have to bear the resentments of 21st century Hindus in a political modern society for what kings did 400 years ago and 700 years ago? Did they have any control over it? Did you and I have control over what Brahmins did? Should all new generations of Germans be held responsible for their Nazi forefathers did? In the modern context, how do you see this resolve in a less volcanic way and perhaps in a less unfair way?
Certainly not. I do not want to excavate the acrimonies of the past to settle scores today. But one way of also moving beyond the past is to accept without glossing over, without deliberate amnesia, without only referring repeatedly, as some authors whom I don't want to cite, about Deen-e-Ilahi of Akbar as the sign of the great eclecticism of the Islamic rulers. That's a false narrative of history. When Bakhtiyar Khilji burnt Nalanda, it burnt for 8 months. Let's understand what happened. And let's say it happened in the past. And now we have developed a culture where there is a level of syncretism, where in a modern republic, people should respect each other and live peacefully as citizens of one country. But I cannot myself countenance anymore the entire school of leftist historians who will deal with ancient India and those 4,000 years from the exclusive prism of Marx's Asiatic modes of production and deal with India post the coming of Islam as a period of great syncretism, that they came in and they began to have halwa and we began to have biryani, and move on quickly to the present. Now, this narrative is false. It's wrong. It will not heal wounds. It should not be any reason to resort to hatred and violence today. But it should be reason to introspect.
No,
I mean, do you know, again, if I were to tell you, somebody I have great respect for, Dr. Amartya Sen in The Argumentative Indian, please go to the footnotes. Every time he refers to how argumentative, open, eclectic, tolerant we are, it's through Hindu sources. He will quote everything imaginable to prove it, which is the truth. Then he comes to that period of 1,000 years and more, which is Islam. And the maximum number of references are to Akbar's Deen-e-Ilahi. भाई कुछ और भी तो होगा या नहीं होगा? Accept it.
No, I think, like I said, for me, speaking personally for myself, there is a need for honest scholarship of that period.
Absolutely.
There's a need for acknowledging of the devastations of that period, as well as the accretions, because all societies are layers, Pavan, and same way as 300 years of British rule depleted India from 22% of world GDP to 2% of world GDP. But it also left us with a common language, some, ideas of.
Well, if I were to draw a balance sheet, I would.
No, I'm not drawing a balance sheet. All I'm saying is that, like we don't visit resentment. So 2 points. One is that we don't visit resentment on Britain.
Of course not.
So the modern Muslim.
What I'm saying, Shoma, if you'll excuse that, I needed a glass of water. What I'm saying is that it will help us to heal together as a society and a nation better, because whether you accept it or not, whether I am willing to believe it or not, there is a backlash against a biased narrative of history today. And therefore, there is a need for course correction.
Right. So, Pavan, again, I'm just going to put this one thought back on our conversation, is that even as we have that honest scholarship and we acknowledge without fear, because like I said, the modern Muslim, the weaver, the carpenter, the doctor, the entrepreneur has no control over what Muslim kings did in the past, same as I have no control over what my zamindari forefathers did, how they oppressed Dalits or caste Hindus. I have no control. So I can't bear that burden because I want to live in a modern context with a new framework. But so even within that honest scholarship, would it be important, is all I'm asking, to remind ourselves that even Muslim rule was not monolithic rule, that within that also you had collaborations with Hindu kings and Muslim kings. You had Muslim rulers fighting other Muslim rulers. And they were, like Ashoka, he brought devastation upon the land till Kalinga changed him as a ruler, So it's just to remember that that was a medieval period. Do you think that's fair?
I think that's fair. And I think those moments of melding between two civilizational streams is important to cite. Equally, to stop your narrative there and look upon that period without acknowledging. And I don't want to go into the details because they'll be painful, and it's best forgotten, but not deliberately projected as not having existed. I mean, and there are lessons to draw from this, Shoma. If you know that past and you put it behind you, in my view, and I'm sorry, we are going into areas which would be, from your point of view, controversial. If there was a question of millions of Hindus wanting a temple at a place where a mosque had been built on a temple, which was not a fundamentally important mosque, of course, all places of worship are, I would have thought there would have been an important resurrection of liberal voices within the Muslim community in India saying, we will build a mosque nearby. This is a place which you associate as the birthplace of Ram. Maybe, like faith cannot always produce evidence, but let us move on together as one community or one nation.
No, in fact,
all the acts of appeasement that have followed, and I use that word carefully, from Gandhiji joining the Khilafat movement of God, I've never understood the logic. For the Ottoman Empire, to Prime Minister Nehru writing a letter to Dr. Rajendra Prasad, the President of India, not to go to Somnath to attend the opening of the temple, to Shabano, to the stunning liberal silence on the expulsion of the Kashmiri Pandits. I mean, these are issues which we have to settle in order to achieve that goal which you are aspiring for and which I desire. And there is no point brushing them under the carpet anymore, because you will only enhance schism in society.
The pressure cooker builds up when you don't allow conversation.
Let's get on with it.
But on the Ayodhya question, Pavan, in fact, I've had several rounds of dialogue with Subramaniam Swamy, who is one of the petitioners, or at least he's the most, he's a big articulator of the Ayodhya movement and the need for the temple. And I also, while absolutely, undeniably wanting, constitutional amity between Hindus and Muslims in modern India. And I don't believe that any of the past can be sorted by lynching and making Muslims feel threatened in modern India. Absolutely, I'm unequivocally that person. But I also feel that, yes, if there's such an important civilizational story versus the Babri Masjid, which was not essential to Muslim identity, it was an unequal conflict. Muslims should have perhaps conceded that space because stories are important to a society. But I asked Swami once, I said, do you think if Hindus had ever reached out to Muslims asking for this as a civilizational conversation rather than an act of dominance, the whole response would have been different? The breaking of the masjid became a crime, and after that, the building of the temple became an act of dominance, of rubbing their nose in the sand, rather than a civilizational conversation between two communities. Do you think that that's
Shoma, to the question of how it could have been handled differently, I'm not for a demolition of a mosque. I'm a deeply secular person. It could have been handled better. But I can say to you that my Muslim brothers and sisters were given enough chances for years before 1993 happened, or was it 1992 December, to come to terms or have discussions instead of a blanket denial. So, whether it was that act of dominance through violence, I can't support. But equally, I sometimes feel that my brothers in the Muslim community do not have the right leadership, which can articulate what needs to be a balanced response, which is not necessarily a subordinate response, to build greater amity between two communities which are together fundamentally a part of one republic. And we will not go into such questions because sometimes the very act of saying that this question is important is a derogation from an absolute concept of secularism. But my Muslim friends agree with me. Javed Akhtar agrees with me. Why don't we have more of them?
Well, not just Javed Saab. Javed Saab doesn't identify as a, he's an atheist. He's a cultural Muslim, but not as. But that apart, I mean, as I said, I think the whole Ayodhya temple conversation, which anyway now the Supreme Court has settled one way or the other, and Muslim communities have accepted that. But I think the tonality of this, Pavan, and I think those who want to heal these, have honest conversations, the tonality of it is, when you were talking about intention, your own intention also needs to be interrogated. That what is the tone in which you're doing it? What are the anxieties from both sides? Where will it end? I think there's also this sense that after Babri Masjid, it'll be Kashi Vishwanath. Where will that writing of history end? Will we start breaking the Taj Mahal to see what's beneath? And essential idea that society has layers. All societies, if you take Turkey or Syria or any civilization, has been built with layers of violence until we've all arrived at a modern idea of a nation. So where does that score settling end? I think that's something that one should be honest about.
I agree with you. Every country must chart its own course to reconciliation, reconciling the past with the imperatives of the present. But that journey is important, Shoma. There's no point putting a premature closure to it. And it's best done through civilized discourse. When I say, for instance, that the narrative of history that we have been taught or which has been privileged does not sufficiently take into account some of the remarkable contributions in the secular field from art, sculpture, science, politics, medicine, as we should know.
You're saying
Or
about
that a generation is adrift.
Sorry, I didn't get it.
I was trying to say to you that this narrative of history by which we have become, in a sense, severed from some of the foundational and remarkable refinements, along with the drawbacks of our own past, the dominant past of 4,000, 5,000 years, needs correction. And I'm not talking only in the religious sense. I was saying in science, in technology, in medicine, in politics, in art, in literature, in poetry, in theatre.
Cosmology.
Cosmology. People know Shakespeare, don't know Kalidas. Something is wrong. And there's a backlash against it today. And that's the Renaissance Hinduism awaits. Not violence, not irrational hate, but once again to go back to your roots culturally rooted to understand what the Hindu civilization was and should be, which has never been bigoted, which has been accommodated, but which is not entirely oblivious to neglect.
Well, thank you very, very much, Pavan. This could be a conversation that just goes on actually for 7 hours, or the famous dialogue between Adi Shankaracharya and
Mandan Mishra.
Mandan Mishra and his wife, which went on for how long?
For weeks, for days.
For weeks and days. So we could be doing that. But thank you very, very much. I do hope that we can make space for more honest conversations with that, not tinged with fear and not tinged with revenge. I think that would be something we would all love.
And tinged with honesty.
Absolutely. Thank you, Pavan.